For over a decade, the walls of Kensington Palace have served as a fortress of discretion, a place where family tensions are buried beneath layers of protocol and the stoic mantra of never complain, never explain. But at 8:17 a.m. on that fateful morning, the fortress gates swung open, not to welcome a guest, but to fire a warning shot that reverberated across the Atlantic. The unprecedented joint statement from the Prince and Princess of Wales did not just break the news cycle. It shattered 15 years of carefully cultivated royal silence. To truly understand the seismic nature of this moment, we must first understand the woman at the center of the storm. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has built her entire royal existence on a foundation of dignified restraint. She has absorbed years of microscopic scrutiny, with a grace that rivals the late Queen herself. She has smiled through attacks on her appearance, her background, and her personality, without uttering a single public word of defense. Silence was her shield, and dignity was her weapon. But the intelligence that reached William and Catherine in late November changed everything. This was no longer about petty gossip or the usual tabloid speculation. The palace had uncovered evidence of what they termed a coordinated plan, a calculated, multi-platform strategy designed to weaponize the holiday season against the Wales family. But the true horror lay in the specific target of this campaign. It wasn't targeting the monarchy as an institution. It was targeting Catherine's integrity as a mother. The intelligence reports detailed a narrative being constructed in California involving a documentary project and a manuscript which sought to reframe Catherine's life's work in early childhood development. The proposed narrative was twisted and cruel. It alleged that her dedication to other people's children was merely a psychological overcompensation for her own parenting anxieties and coldness behind closed doors. It was a direct attempt to rewrite history, portraying the princess not as the victim of bullying, but as the architect of family division. For Catherine, this crossed the ultimate line. She realized that her silence, once a sign of strength, was now being interpreted by her adversaries as weakness, an empty space where they could paint any lie they wished. The terrifying thought that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis might grow up to read these fabricated stories about their mother's cruelty was the catalyst that hardened her resolve. In a private, emotionally charged meeting at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine looked at William and made the decision that would stun the world. She was done absorbing the blows. She was done protecting the peace at the expense of the truth. The statement released that morning was not just a press release. It was a declaration of war against the lies. It signaled that the Princess of Peace had transformed into the protector of the realm, ready to burn down the protocol of silence to shield her children from the flames of a secret vendetta. The statement that shook the world at 8:17 a.m. was not the beginning of the battle. It was the strategic culmination of a month-long counterintelligence operation mounted discreetly within Kensington Palace. The threat did not arrive with a single dramatic envelope or a shocking headline. It emerged, as all insidious campaigns do, through a pattern of small, almost imperceptible shifts in the media landscape, a quiet digital hum that slowly built into a roar. The first alarm bell rang not in William's office, but in the Royal Communications Monitoring Unit in early November. This department, tasked with tracking global media inquiries, detected a striking anomaly, a sudden, unusual spike in questions about Catherine. But these were not the typical queries about her upcoming public engagements or her established charitable patronages. These were surgically specific requests, inquiries suggesting intimate, inside knowledge of private decisions and charitable funding choices, designed, according to the unit's assessment, to provoke responses that could be framed negatively. Princess Anne, briefed on the unusual activity, was the first to recognize the distinct signature of an organized offensive. Anne, a veteran of decades of media warfare against the royal family, spoke with characteristic bluntness to William during a private meeting at Windsor. "Someone is planting stories," she warned him, "and they're doing it strategically, testing which narratives gain traction before committing to larger releases." William, who had always preferred to maintain a dignified silence, recognized the gravity of her assessment. and immediately authorized a deep, urgent investigation. What his dedicated intelligence team uncovered over the following 2 weeks went far beyond simple rumor-mongering. The initial inquiries were meticulously traced back to a newly formed, opaque media production company based in California. This company, thinly veiled but quickly linked through documented connections to individuals within Meghan's known professional circle, was identified as the operational nexus. The documentary project they were developing, with a working title that sensationally promised to reveal untold royal truths, was revealed to be merely the tip of the spear. Palace contacts in the American publishing industry soon confirmed the second major component, a circulating book proposal. Described in pitch documents as a definitive corrective to royal narratives, the manuscript allegedly contained previously undisclosed details about Catherine's alleged role in Meghan's departure. The narrative painted a damning picture of active obstruction, suggesting behavior that ranged from coldness to active obstruction on Catherine's part, a sophisticated effort to paint the public favorite as the private villain. But the most insidious detail was the timing. Both the documentary and the book were strategically scheduled for release during the sacred Christmas season. This period, traditionally reserved for royal unity, public service messaging, and family celebration, was precisely chosen to ensure maximum media domination, framing Meghan as the courageous truth-teller positioned against Catherine, the alleged obstructionist. The discovery was not just a piece of gossip. It was the detailed blueprint of a calculated, multi-platform strategic assault, confirming for William and Catherine that they were not facing grievances. They were facing a targeted campaign of professional and personal destruction. The sheer malice of the coordinated plan was not simply in its existence, but in its meticulous psychological targeting. It was designed to hit Catherine where her public work and personal identity converged, her decade-long, deeply committed focus on early childhood development. This field, her signature achievement as the Princess of Wales, was not merely a ceremonial patronage. It was a deeply personal mission that she had dedicated immense time, research, and credibility to build. The intelligence reports revealed the third, most insidious element of the campaign, a coordinated media talking points package distributed to sympathetic American media outlets. These talking points were intended to be released in tight synchronicity with the book and documentary, creating a powerful, self-validating narrative echo chamber. The core message was engineered to be devastatingly personal. It would subtly suggest that Catherine's intense focus on early childhood health and development did not stem from genuine commitment, but was instead a public act of overcompensation for her own emotional instability and private parenting anxieties. This was a calculated, precision-guided attack designed to achieve two goals simultaneously. First, to fatally undermine her credibility on her most significant public platform, and second, to weaponize her deepest fear that her children would be implicitly harmed by the public dissection of her role as a mother. When Catherine was privately briefed on these specifics at Kensington Palace in mid-November, she listened in chilling silence. She had endured countless tabloid headlines, but this was different. This was a sophisticated, high-level attempt to poison the well of her life's work. When the briefing concluded, the princess, famous for her composure, asked only one question, which cut to the heart of the matter. How much of this targets our children indirectly through attacking my parenting? The carefully delivered answer confirmed her worst fears. Several planned narrative elements were intended to suggest that her work was not an authentic commitment, but a response to personal inadequacy. For William, who sat beside his wife during the briefing, this confirmation hardened his spirit. For years, he had operated under the belief that royal dignity and restraint would eventually exhaust those seeking conflict. But this plan, this calculated strategy of psychological warfare, which specifically targeted Catherine's work and implicitly questioned her fitness as a mother during the sacred family season of Christmas, crossed a line he would never permit to be breached. It transformed the conflict from a matter of public relations into a matter of absolute defense. The threat was no longer external noise. It was a direct assault on the foundations of their family unit, demanding a response that had to be as strategic, as unified, and as public as the attack itself. For years, the unspoken agreement between the two royal households, Kensington and Montecito, had been one of mutual, albeit grudging, restraint. While Harry and Meghan were free to pursue their commercial interests, there was an invisible red line: the children and the working projects of the Waleses. The moment the coordinated plan was discovered to target Catherine's early childhood work, and implicitly her mothering, that invisible treaty was declared null and void by William. The Prince of Wales, a man whose public composure masks a fiercely protective and often tempestuous private nature, saw this attack as a direct betrayal of family ties and a profound failure of the mutual silence they had maintained since the Sussexes' departure. This wasn't merely a difference in philosophy. It was a strategic decision to financially capitalize on the destruction of his wife's reputation, and most significant contribution to the monarchy. William's internal response was immediate and resolute. He convened his most trusted advisors, a small, tight-knit group known as the A-Team, and delivered an ultimatum that shocked even them. We will not allow them to use our family as their source material anymore. If the line is crossed, we cross back. The gloves are off. This was a fundamental pivot from the palace's traditional defensive posture. For the first time, William was demanding an offensive strategy, a preemptive strike, to neutralize the threat before the book and documentary could be released. Crucially, the decision to issue the joint statement was not a last resort. It was the chosen first move in this new strategic defense. The goal was to invalidate the attack before it even launched. By publicly naming the existence of a coordinated plan to undermine, the Waleses were stripping the planned releases of their claimed neutrality and secrecy. They were reframing the narrative from untold truths to weaponized, orchestrated lies. Catherine, having defined the line that was crossed, fully endorsed this aggressive approach. She insisted that the statement must be simple, direct, and unyielding, a clear signal that the era of passive absorption of criticism was over. She understood that a strong, unified response was the only way to safeguard the mental well-being of her children, ensuring that the media storm, when it hit, would be interpreted through the lens of parental defense, not family scandal. The joint statement was, therefore, not a plea for peace, but the opening salvo in a strategic maneuver to demonstrate that the Waleses would fight back, not with rumors, but with the full force of their consolidated public authority. The unprecedented joint statement of November 29th was not an impulsive reaction. It was an act of last resort, publicly sanctioned only after the palace had exhausted every avenue of private, diplomatic intervention. William and Catherine first attempted 3 separate, escalating warnings designed to halt Meghan's plan without public confrontation. Each failure served as a grim, undeniable confirmation that the adversaries would not be reasoned with, and that continued silence was no longer tenable. The first warning came in early November, delivered through the only viable channel remaining between the Wales and Sussex households, Prince Harry. The communication, drafted by William personally, was intentionally direct but non-hostile. It meticulously informed Harry that the palace had obtained concrete intelligence regarding media projects designed to specifically attack Catherine, and it requested, not threatened, that Harry use his influence to ensure such projects did not proceed. William chose his words carefully, avoiding direct accusation and appealing instead to Harry's identity as a brother and father who understood the importance of protecting family boundaries. The message ended with a line William had debated, including but ultimately felt necessary. Some boundaries once crossed cannot be uncrossed. I hope we can avoid reaching that point. Harry's response, received 3 days later, was defensively dismissive. He denied all knowledge of any coordinated plan, suggested William was being paranoid, and accused his brother of viewing Meghan through a perpetual lens of suspicion. The response contained no promise to investigate or intervene, simply rejecting the premise of any wrongdoing. Upon reading it, Catherine quietly acknowledged, "He either doesn't know, or he doesn't want to know. Either way, we cannot rely on him to stop this." The second warning followed in mid-November, adopting a more formal, legalistic approach. Palace legal advisors dispatched a precise cease and desist letter to the California-based production company identified as the operational nexus of the documentary. The letter was carefully crafted to establish a legal record without unduly escalating the conflict, noting that the palace had reason to believe the project would include false and defamatory claims specifically targeting Catherine. It did not threaten immediate legal action, but formally requested transparency and a discussion of the content before the project advanced further. The response from the company's attorneys was equally formal but fundamentally dismissive. They asserted that their project was protected speech, that all content would be properly sourced, and that they had no legal obligation to submit any materials for palace review prior to release. William immediately grasped that the company felt immune. They were confident that any actual defamation lawsuit would take years to resolve, generating the exact publicity the palace sought to avoid. They were banking on the royal family's traditional reluctance to engage in protracted public legal battles to shield them from consequences. These first two failures proved that the path of private diplomacy was completely exhausted. The third and final warning came from the most elevated and unexpected source, King Charles III himself. In late November, with the intelligence reports confirming the plan's aggressive nature and imminent Christmas season launch, Charles drafted a deeply personal letter addressed directly to Meghan. Palace officials who later reviewed the document described it as both heartfelt and remarkably vulnerable. The letter represented Charles's last, desperate hope for reconciliation and peace. It did not contain any threats or direct accusations. Instead, it appealed to a shared sense of humanity and what remained of the family connection. Charles wrote openly about his hopes for unity and acknowledged that mistakes had been made on all sides during Meghan's brief tenure as a working royal, expressing understanding for her feelings of hurt or misunderstanding. However, the core purpose of the letter was a plain, clear plea. Charles directly and plainly asked her not to pursue actions that would cause deliberate, unnecessary harm to Catherine. He emphasized Catherine's position, a woman who had always tried to welcome her and was now raising 3 young children while simultaneously managing significant public responsibilities and immense pressure. The final paragraph of the letter reportedly underscored his personal devastation. "I have lost too much already to family division. I do not wish to lose more, but I cannot stand by while one member of my family orchestrates the destruction of another's reputation. I am asking you, as your father-in-law, who wishes you well, to choose a different path." Charles sent the letter through secure diplomatic channels to ensure its direct, undeniable receipt by Meghan. He waited nearly 2 weeks for a response that never came. The silence was not just a lack of communication, it was an answer in itself, a definitive confirmation that the pursuit of her plan mattered more to her than the preservation of any remaining family ties or the personal distress of the king. When William learned that even his father's deeply personal and vulnerable appeal had been ignored and dismissed, the last constraint on his own strategic response dissolved. Every avenue for non-public resolution had been exhausted. Fraternal appeal had been rejected, legal warnings had been brushed aside, and now a heartfelt plea from the head of the family had been met with cold silence. The intelligence reports continued to confirm that the aggressive campaign was moving forward toward its planned Christmas launch, operating with absolute confidence that the palace would remain predictably silent. That late November evening, William and Catherine sat together at Adelaide Cottage, reviewing the chronology of failed warnings. It was Catherine, the longtime advocate for patience, who finally articulated the unyielding truth. "She's not going to stop," she said quietly, "and if we don't defend ourselves publicly, the narrative she creates will become the narrative everyone believes." William took his wife's hand, his own resolve now fully hardened. "Then we speak together, not with anger, but with clarity. We confirm that we know what's being planned, and we make clear that we won't allow it to proceed without response." This conversation was the final, critical step that led to the drafting of the unprecedented joint statement, which would be released just days later. With all private diplomatic channels exhausted, William and Catherine swiftly transitioned from defense to strategic counterattack. The goal was no longer to silently absorb the threat, but to preemptively neutralize the narrative before the book and documentary could even hit the market. The final, critical document, the joint statement, was drafted in a single, intense night session involving the prince, the princess, and their closest legal and communications advisors, the A-Team. The drafting process was characterized by a cold, legal precision, not emotional rhetoric. Catherine insisted on removing any language that could be interpreted as personal venting or mere gossip. Her focus was entirely on establishing 3 verifiable legal and factual points. First, that a coordinated plan existed. Second, that the plan was designed to undermine the family. And third, that the palace was aware of the full scope of the malicious intent. The strategic weight of the phrase coordinated plan to undermine was enormous. It transformed the Sussexes' actions from mere family grievances into a potentially actionable campaign of corporate interference and defamation. The statement was dropped into the global news cycle at an unusually quiet time, maximizing its immediate impact. The shockwave was immediate and bifurcated across the globe. In the United Kingdom, the reaction was one of stunned solidarity. The British public and established media outlets instantly recognized the gravity of the move. For the Waleses to break their silence in such a definitive manner signaled a threat of extraordinary magnitude. It was immediately understood as the royal family's official, public declaration that they were under organized attack, and that this threat originated from outside the UK. The media consensus was that the family's shield of silence had been shattered, only because the very foundations of the monarchy were at risk. In the United States, the reaction was initially dominated by disbelief and defensive skepticism, particularly within media circles sympathetic to Meghan. Their immediate interpretation was that this was a clumsy, old-fashioned palace attempt to stifle freedom of speech. However, the carefully chosen language, the mention of a plan and coordination, caused immediate, palpable alarm among the leadership of the California production company and the publishing house. They instantly recognized that the palace had obtained credible intelligence, potentially exposing them to significant legal and financial risk regarding contract breaches and defamation. The immediate fallout was a deafening silence from the West Coast. The production company and publisher immediately entered internal damage control, frantically trying to assess how much of their blueprint Kensington Palace had truly acquired. The public statement had achieved its first crucial strategic victory. It had injected so much public doubt and legal risk into the attack's foundation that its financial viability was instantly jeopardized. The Waleses had successfully turned a defensive crisis into a counteroffensive that shifted the burden of proof squarely onto their adversaries. The release of the joint statement achieved its ultimate strategic goal not through moral victory, but through a brutal, immediate financial one. William and Catherine had not just issued a warning, they had legally and commercially poisoned the well of the Sussexes' planned projects, rendering them toxic and commercially unviable for any major network or publisher in the Western world. In the days immediately following the statement, the California operation experienced a rapid, catastrophic implosion. The financial calculus of the documentary and the book changed overnight. Prior to the palace's intervention, the projects were viewed as a high-reward, low-risk venture, banking entirely on the royal family's predictable silence to shield them from messy public consequences. Now, the projects were instantly transformed into massive, potentially uninsurable liabilities, threatening the bottom line of every company involved. The key pivot occurred in the legal and insurance departments of the production company's partners. No major, reputable publisher or distributor is willing to release content that has been formally and publicly labeled by the future King and Queen of the United Kingdom as part of a coordinated plan to undermine. The risk of protracted, expensive international litigation was now too high. Lawyers demanded immediate changes, demanding to see evidence that explicitly refuted the palace's claim, evidence that, of course, could not be produced because the plan was coordinated and strategic. The publishing house, which had previously expressed confidence and offered a sizable advance, became the first to officially blink. Their book proposal, which had been circulating with lucrative pre-sales potential, was immediately yanked from active consideration. The publisher could not risk a public spectacle, the certain international backlash, and the crippling legal costs associated with defending a text that the palace had effectively branded as state-level defamation. They realized the potential loss far outweighed the gain. The domino effect was swift and decisive. Without the financial guarantee and distribution network of a major publisher or media distributor, the documentary, the very instrument designed to validate the entire narrative, was deemed financially unviable. The production company, now isolated, facing potential contract breaches from their own legal team, and suddenly unable to find a buyer, was forced into a state of indefinite freeze. The strategic genius of the Kensington Palace counterstrike was fully realized. They had used the only language their commercial adversaries understood, the language of money and legal liability. Within 10 days of the joint statement's release, the coordinated plan was effectively shelved and dismantled. It was not a negotiated retreat, it was an abortion. The hidden attack on Catherine's work and her children had been neutralized, not by the monarchy's ancient power, but by the modern, precise application of public relations strategy and financial risk assessment, achieving what years of private negotiation had failed to do. The successful neutralization of the California Plan was more than a tactical victory. It was a profound, irreversible moment of reset for the Prince and Princess of Wales, solidifying their bond and radically altering the public's perception of Catherine. Their marriage, having withstood the most brutal form of strategic attack, one that targeted their children and professional integrity, emerged from the fire stronger, forged by shared necessity and unwavering mutual protection. For William, this event destroyed the last remnants of his romantic hope for a peaceful, unspoken reconciliation with his brother. He was forced to accept the painful truth that the family division was now permanent, financially motivated, and aggressively hostile. This acceptance led to a critical, internal shift. William and Catherine tightened their inner circle to a select, loyal few, the A-team now functioning as a shield. They committed to relying entirely on their own judgment and intelligence, trusting the wider, leak-prone palace machinery far less than before. The lesson was learned. Absolute protection comes only from absolute unity. But the most significant transformation was that of Catherine herself. The perception of the Princess of Wales changed overnight. She was no longer just the elegant, composed figure the press often dismissed as weighty Katie, or the dutiful royal apprentice, destined to fade into the background. She was revealed as the fierce, strategic backbone of the monarchy, the protector of the realm, who drew an uncompromising line in the sand. This event introduced the world to the Catherine Standard. The Catherine Standard dictates that while the monarchy must endure public criticism and media scrutiny, the safety and emotional integrity of the children and the veracity of the working royal's core projects are non-negotiable. She demonstrated that defending these foundational elements is not a breach of royal protocol. It is a higher form of duty that supersedes the traditional never complain rule. The public silence she maintained for over a decade was only broken when the deepest foundations of her family and her work were under calculated siege. The cost was, of course, the definitive and irreversible fracturing of the family. The public declaration of the coordinated plan to undermine closed the door on any meaningful relationship between the Waleses and the Sussexes. But in the eyes of the British public, this sacrifice solidified William and Catherine's position. They had chosen the future, the stability of the institution, and the fierce protection of their young family over the manufactured drama and commercialization of private grievances. Catherine's final warning was not just about stopping a document. It was about defining the ethical limits of royal warfare and establishing a new, fiercely protective precedent for the modern crown. The dust has settled on the joint statement, and the immediate threat has been neutralized. But the true, enduring significance of this conflict is only now beginning to be fully understood. This was never merely a diplomatic skirmish or a family disagreement. It was the definitive moment that cemented Catherine's place not just as the future queen consort, but as the monarchy's essential political firewall. Her final warning was ultimately a multi-layered declaration of sovereignty. It was a warning to the Sussexes that their commercial model, based on weaponizing family history, would no longer be passively tolerated. It was a clear warning to the global media that the rules of engagement had changed. Attack the institution, but never the children or the core integrity of the working projects. And most critically, it was an internal warning to the palace itself, signaling that the future king and queen would no longer rely solely on the old guard's mantra of absolute silence, but would use modern strategic aggression to protect what matters most. This new precedent has fundamentally altered the relationship between the crown and its critics. The era of the monarchy being a passive target, simply absorbing blows without response, is definitively over. Under William and Catherine, the future institution will be leaner, more unified, and demonstrably willing to confront aggression with tailored, preemptive force, especially when the welfare of the children, who are the ultimate successors, is at stake. This moment was the most important public action they have taken since their wedding. The hidden attack on her children, therefore, failed in its immediate goal, but succeeded in its unintended consequence. It forced Catherine to reveal her hand, demonstrating a calculated strength and a maternal fury that few had previously anticipated. The composure and elegance that defined her early years were revealed to be the steel casing around a core of iron resolve. She didn't win this battle by being universally popular. She won by being ruthlessly strategic and legally sound. Ultimately, the story of the final warning is the story of power. It reminds us that in the highest echelons of influence, silence is often mistaken for weakness, and the deepest vulnerabilities, like a mother's love, can become the most potent weapons when defended without compromise. Catherine's success confirms that sometimes the only way to safeguard your future is to publicly define the boundaries of your past. The monarchy, fragile and enduring, continues to rely on the dignity and strategic resolve of its protectors. But we must ask ourselves the final question: at what cost does this protection come? Has the monarchy truly reformed, or has it simply perfected the art of the counterstrike, ensuring that only the most sophisticated players can endure the new rules of engagement? The answer to that will define the reign of King William V. We invite you to share your thoughts on the legacy of the Catherine Standard in the comments below.